For today's book review, we're going to be reviewing Salesforce Discovery 101 by Pei Mun Lim. This is a book that I was really excited about reviewing as it covers the Discovery project, something that I don't think is covered very well or at all really in any other Salesforce book. So let's have a review of the book and dive straight on in. The book is an overview of how to run a discovery project. That is the project that happens before an implementation project, where you'll do some interviews, workshops, and just really try to understand the requirements and business processes of the customer. So you can then formalize and document the requirements. Normally, if there'll be a bunch of supporting documentation and workflow diagrams, business process diagrams, different things like that, so that you can then put together a full implementation timeline and project to go and implement. I've done a lot of discovery projects in my career, some with really big multinationals for sort of 6 month, 12-month implementation projects, and some with just startups and smaller organizations that are just there to understand what their needs are as they get going. I completely agree with Pei, who makes it clear throughout this book that doing a discovery can really help you get the implementation project right. And I've worked on some great discoveries where that's happened and the implementation project's gone smoothly. I've also worked on some not so great discoveries where, we then hit a few snags on the implementation. And I've also worked on some implementations where the discovery perhaps wasn't done as well as it could have been. And we've hit a few snags along the way. So completely agree with Pei. This is one of the most important parts of the processing, kind of sizing and estimating, getting a project up and running. That's why I think it's really important for us. In the introduction to the book, Pei says it's aimed at those who've never been on a discovery before, haven't worked in consulting before, or want to learn how to run a discovery project. She also wants to aim this at people who are leading Salesforce practices to help them understand how their team should be running discovery projects. She also has a lot of stick figures in the book and says that it's for people who just like her stick figure drawings as well, which I'm sure you'll get to love as you read. I personally think the best target audience for this is those that are just starting out in consultancy or haven't done a discovery project before, like Rouge, who's the graduate who's at the heart of the story of the book. When I'm thinking about books, I often think about who I'd buy the book for. And if I was still running a Salesforce consulting partner, or if I were running a Salesforce team, I'd be buying this book for those that are brand new to consulting and need to understand how the Salesforce discovery process should work. If I was running that team as well, I might look through it, read the book, see where I agree, where I disagree, because I think it's always important when you read a book to see which parts you agree and disagree with, to kind of challenge your own perceptions rather than just take things on blindly. And I do that just to help me understand if my practice was doing discoveries properly and if I'd run 100 discoveries, just to make sure that there were any extra tips I could do just to sharpen the process a little bit. Um, I think, if you are someone who is running a practice, this will definitely help you do that and improve that. But it's also a really good option for you to give to a customer who's about to undergo a consulting project with you as part of a discovery. And I think if you are a Salesforce end user who's about to undertake a discovery project, this could also be a really good book for you so that you can understand exactly what's expected of you, exactly what you should expect of the partner, and I think it's a really good overview and introduction that will just help both teams understand exactly what they should be doing and how they should be interacting together to make the process smooth. So the book follows the adventures of Rouge, who's a new graduate who's just starting at a fictional consulting company called Cloudacious. I really like the format and structure of the book. The sections it's broken into kind of follow the timeline of a discovery project. So a lot of the discoveries I've worked on have followed the same sort of 6 weeks plan that Pei has in the book, where you have week 0, which is kind of your preliminary get started week, weeks 1 to 4, where you do your workshops, your interviews, you gather all your requirements. Week 5, where you write everything up, make sure it's all documented neatly, detailed, etc., etc., and then week 6, where you play it back. I think the structure of the book works really well to help guide you through that process, and I think the use of Rouge throughout as a storytelling device adds some extra context and information in there that makes the book much easier to read and also much more relevant for those that are reading it and understanding discoveries for the first time. The structure as well makes it nice and easy so that if you were going through a discovery project, you could kind of come back to it every few weeks and see what's going on, what should be happening, and help yourself prepare and review what you've been doing as well as a nice little reference guide. So the book starts obviously with section 1, which is really Rouge's first week at Cloudacious and her getting to grips with understanding when she's going to get a project, what's expected of her, and all the things around being a new graduate and starting out at a consulting company. I think it covers off that process, quite well at a high level. In chapter 4, we dive into asking for a mentor, which I think is something that I know Pei feels quite strongly about from some of her other pieces of work she's done, and I think is a key thing if you are a new starter and fresh to the Salesforce ecosystem, but really to any ecosystem, and want to progress to try and get someone who can help guide you and advise you on that. The only bit of feedback I give is on the email template that Pei shares. I would perhaps focus less on the kind of what's in it for me that you're giving to the mentor that you're asking of, but more perhaps let the mentor know why it is you want to work with them and want to be mentored by them. When I get mentorship requests, you know, part of the balance of this from a good mentor's perspective in my mind is also knowing if you're the right person to be mentoring. So if someone comes to me and says, Paul, I'd like mentoring in this, if they let me know why they've chosen me, why they want me to mentor them in it, what specifically they want me to do as part of this mentorship, help me get a job or help me get certified at too broad. What is it in specifics that you want me to help you with? And to me, that's far more important. It's more likely to help me understand if I'm the right person, or sometimes actually point them to someone else who's far more relevant for them. So a little bit of feedback, I think, if you were to change that going forward. But overall, the mentorship request is great. Just something that I think, from my experience, might help to improve the chances of actually getting that response. We then have, at the end of this section, a really good discussion on work-life balance and getting onto projects. Now, I think this was a really good chapter to include so early on because when you're working in a consulting organization, work-life balance can be tough. I've worked in a number of consultancies, run consultancies, and I've spent a lot of hours outside of regular working hours working on things, evenings, weekends, to kind of get projects over the line, to catch up on stuff. And I've spent a lot of time traveling and things like that. And it can really mess you up if you're not careful. I think it's really good that Pei's included that early on in what I think is a very honest assessment and discussion of it, not just a only work 9 to 5 and that's it to maintain a healthy balance perspective, but also a if you're early on in your career and you have the opportunity to perhaps put in that little bit of extra effort, you might benefit from it. And it's a very realistic assessment of how the world works. In there as well, Pei talks about the difficulties of actually getting on a project. I know one of the toughest things as a consultant that's starting out is getting on a project that you think's interesting, you think's going to progress you. Especially with Salesforce releasing kind of a new product every so often, and rebranding products as well, and purchasing products. It can be very difficult for you to get on something that you think is going to challenge you and is interesting. So, for example, getting on an analytics project or getting on a data cloud project or whatever it might be. And part of that is always going to be down to what projects the organization has. And I think Pei's coverage of that is really good. It's really detailed, really honest again, and frank. And one of the things I just echo that Pei says in chapter 5, which is it's a great chapter, is just to look at any project you get and don't waste the opportunity on it. I've had projects that were some of the most sort of on paper boring and mundane things, updating unit tests or converting some form of process from one sort of logic type to another, or data mapping and updates. But every time I've done them, I've found that they can be a really good way of kind of honing and sharpening a skill and really kind of helping you progress your overall understanding of the platform, but also how you can kind of make these things quicker and easier to do in the future. And particularly with something like unit testing as a developer, often seen as a really boring thing, but it allows you to think about how you would structure the code better, how you would test things better, and how to see what assumptions are being made. So that's just one example. I think it's a really good thing that Pei focuses in on. And again, I just reiterate to anyone who is starting out, no project's a bad project, but it's a really great thing for Pei to cover this early on in the book as well. In section 2, we get into week 0, which is typically kind of the kickoff week. It's the week before you start doing actual kind of workshops and meetings. And this section covers that whole process really quite well. My favorite chapter, it was chapter 7, which is about the sales handover. So the sales handover is when you've had a salesperson go and talk to the client, get everything sold, and get the project agreed, and then you have a meeting to kind of understand what was agreed and what you need to deliver. And this is a place where I have seen so many projects fall over and just collapse because the salesperson has promised the moon on a stick, and the implementation team or the consulting team actually have to deliver that. And I think the closer that sales, and that's sort of making some generic statements, but the closer that sales and consultants can work together, the better things will be. Now, for a discovery project like this, it's really key that you ask the right questions. And in this chapter, Pei's got a fantastic list of questions. So if you are new to the sales handover process, go away, read those questions, and make sure you've got them ready. If you're someone who is on the sales side, have a look at those questions. I'd recommend that you give these questions to a salesperson to make sure that they know how to answer them. If you're someone who runs a practice, have a look at those questions, make sure that you've got them in your templates for how these handovers should be run. I've actually typically had a technical person involved in some of my sales cycles as a rule, just to make sure that there isn't any chance for there to be misalignment or for there to be information that's not handed over. So there's a bit of continuity for the client as well. But the list of questions we've got here is a great list from Pei, and I think one that you should really look at and try and apply if you have the opportunity. She also covers for Rouge how an SOW is written. So Rouge is brand new to consulting. She's not really aware of how a price and a timeline have been come up with. And Pei covers what should be included in the SOW. That's the statement of work. And it's a really nice way of covering it. Now, if you're an experienced reader, someone who writes their own SOWs, you might disagree with the format and the contents a little bit. But I think it gives a really good high-level overview of kind of the basics of what should be in there. One of the ways that I always think about what should be in an SOW is that it should answer a bunch of questions. So, who's doing the work? When's it going to be done? What's being delivered? How's it being delivered? Where's it being delivered? What's being handed over? And go through all those questions, including the why and the how it's going to be successful. And I think that if you start to think about how an SOW is structured in that way, it can make it really easy. It definitely helped me when I was starting out reading and writing SOWs. But overall, this section covers that really well. It's a great high-level introduction before we then get into the meat of doing the discovery, which is weeks 1 to 4, when you have your workshops. So section 3, which covers weeks 1 to 4, is the biggest part of the book, taking up about 40% of the overall content. And the reason is it covers the kind of really what a discovery is. So it's running the workshops, documenting what you find, how to ask questions, the QA process, governance, etc. All of these big things, and I think Pei covers it really, really well, and in a great level of detail that can really help. So we start off by going through the workshops. I think Pei's description of how to run a workshop is some of the best I've seen. And if I hadn't run a workshop before, this would allow me to really understand how to go about doing it. And I really like the use of kind of Socratic questioning in there as well to help dive into how you get to the nub of a problem from someone. I think one of the things that perhaps isn't covered enough in there is how to run the session from a sort of own the room kind of perspective. And what I mean by that is the best kind of discoveries I've worked on and been part of are those where we've really turned up. And Pei kind of reiterates this a little bit in terms of preparation, making sure you're ready. But it's things where you turn up and you've done the right level of preparation, you've communicated well with the client up front, you've set expectations correctly. But then when you're doing those workshops, you make sure that the questioning, the answers, and the entire discussion flows properly. I've seen a lot of people who, on their first workshops, or if they're not kind of used to doing them, can easily get bogged down. So a client will want to dive deep into something which really isn't a key part of the process, but it'll be their area. So you'll be interviewing someone who's kind of a periphery input to the project, but they'll want to really deep dive into their specific part. So it's knowing how to dive into the right areas, how to put things into a car park list, or something to come back to later on, how to really control and manage that. So maybe something a little bit to focus on in the future as an addition to the book for maybe the second edition. But overall, the workshop description is really, really good, and Pei covers it all really, really well. Pei covers the bit of documentation and process mapping in detail as well. We talk about universal process notation and some of the documentation around that. Personally, again, I might have liked to have seen a mention of some other different process documentation notations. So I'm a big fan of UML. Now, this might be typically because I do a lot more technical work where I find that, a UML sequence diagram is just key in terms of understanding exactly how the sequence of an integration should run, which you can't do as well with UPN. UPN is really good for sort of high-level processing, and it's really popular with the Salesforce Architect site. But when it comes down to doing things like detailed workflow mapping and integration mapping, BPMN and UML, in my mind, are much bigger and much more useful. And I know that if you work with bigger enterprises as well, a lot of them use like the 4C architecture diagram levels, and so might just be things to mention in the future. But it works really well as it is, and I think Pei covers off the right things properly and includes some good examples of process maps and things in the documentation as well to help out with. Testing and QA are also covered, as well as ownership of the different parts of this process. Pei talks about data cleaning, data cleansing. There may have perhaps been a little bit more on data mapping and master data management, as those are key parts of the process if you have a data kind of migration aspect of the project that you're scoping. But Pei covers what's there really, really well. Same with testing, same with deployment methodology and sandboxes, covers that well. Again, this isn't meant to be a technically exhaustive book, so I can understand why things like scratch orgs and packaging perhaps aren't mentioned. But overall, the detail is at the right level, and governance and privacy is also mentioned around the data, which is just key, is often forgotten about, and is really, really important as well. So this section covers everything in really good detail. And if you're new to a discovery project, or if you do run discoveries regularly, this is just a great way to make sure that you've got that checklist nailed down for your next project so that you can ensure you have everything covered off. The last two sections of the book, sections 4 and 5, deal with the documentation, finalization, and then the playback. Everything's covered really well here. Although the one thing I would have said is that I think that this is a chance perhaps for Pei to inject a little bit more of her personality and humor into the book, especially around the playback session. So the documentation part was covered really well. Pei talks about polishing, making sure that everything's really, really good, making sure that it has that correct level of quality on there that your client's going to be expecting, but also that you need to expect to yourselves as part of any handover. So that was really, really good. But when it comes to the playback, I think Pei could have added a little bit more on how to actually present some of this information back. We talk a lot about kind of making sure that we understand the user personas being involved and writing these business requirements and user requirements like that. And I think I know for a fact from having seen some of Pei's other work that she'll have loads of ideas about how to make this engaging, make this fun, and make it something that both teams are bought into. So just a bit of an area she could have added something more to in the future. A good example is when I used to do some discoveries at a former company I worked at, we used to go along with kind of dressing up items. So we were doing a lot of work in the medical space with pharmaceutical companies and doctors and things like that. And so we would have lab coats, we would have stethoscopes, we would have sort of nurses' hats and things like that. Headsets to pretend we were a call center operative. And what we would do is, whilst one of us was talking through the process map on the board, we would have another one of us, or another few of us, role playing these different pieces where you could then get into the real nitty gritty. And it always made the client laugh, it made them feel engaged. And often, after the first couple, we would get them involved in role playing as well, especially if they were a key person that we'd seen throughout the process that they felt that they also owned some of the outcome here. So just something that's a minor bit of feedback and something that I think that Pei could add some more of her own fun self to in the future. With that, the book wraps up then with a final word from Pei. The last chapter, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I think it's a really good way that Pei summarizes her philosophy and views on learning, on growing, and on delivery in general. And it was a chapter that I really liked and I thought brought everything together really well. So when you get to the end of the book and read this chapter, you'll understand that from my perspective, it was a really nice way of wrapping up everything that had been said and condensing it into how you should think about going forward and learning. So, in a short summary, I'd say yes, I really enjoyed the book. I'd recommend it, especially to those that are starting out and brand new to discovery and consultancy. You'll learn a ton from this and a ton of stuff that's actually going to be applicable whatever project you're doing. I think a lot of the things around like documentation and making sure it's polished, Socratic questioning and understanding real business needs, thinking about setting expectations, all of that stuff's going to be useful in every consulting project, not just in the discovery project. So if you're brand new to consulting, this is going to be really good for you, and I'd 100% recommend it before you start your first consulting project. If you're a more experienced user, if you've run discoveries before, if you run your own Salesforce practice, a lot of this is going to be revision, but I would really recommend that you buy this and have a look to think about sharpening your own axe. If you run a practice, this is a great way of just checking to see that you are covering off some key things and just perhaps reviewing your own processes, reviewing your own standards and templates. If you're someone that's run a lot of discoveries before, this is a good way of just checking, again, that you're doing the right things, that there's things that you might not have thought of, and other tips and tricks you can get. I mean, the book itself here is, it's not the most expensive of books. It's definitely one that you can look at and grab to just give yourself a quick reference guide as well. And if you are running a consultancy, I recommend, again, sending this out to customers before then to take a consulting project or a discovery project with you, just to help them understand those expectations as well. And if you are an end user who is either looking at how they can improve their own discovery, because as an end user, you can still run your discoveries to understand how you should be building and scoping out your own work. But if you're about to do it with a consulting partner, I definitely recommend reading that. So overall, really good book. Thank you to Pei for writing this. I really enjoyed reading it. Again, I don't think the discovery project has been covered off very well by other books. And when I say covered off very well, I mean it's just often ignored, and a lot more focus is put on either the technical aspects or on the project management process, perhaps, and things like that. So this was a really great book, and I'm sure people will enjoy reading it and learn from it. If you'd like to grab a copy, there's a link in the description below that will help support the channel and take you to Amazon. And thank you very much for watching and listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please remember to hit subscribe and give it a like if you've enjoyed this book review. If you've read the book, please leave a comment and let me know how you found it. And if there's a book you'd like to see reviewed or any topics you'd like covered on the channel, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.